The stagecoach rattled into Concord, California, on a blistering August afternoon in 1869, carrying a woman who had not spoken a single word since boarding in San Francisco 3 days prior. Benjamin Fuller stood outside the general store, his hat pulled low against the sun, watching the dust settle as the coach came to a stop. He had been waiting for this moment for 2 months, ever since he had sent that letter east through the matrimonial agency. A cattle rancher at 26, he had built a respectable spread in the foothills, but the loneliness had begun to eat at him like acid on metal. His mother had passed 2 years back, his father 5 years before that, and the silence of the ranch house had grown unbearable. The driver jumped down and opened the door. Benjamin straightened, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 passengers emerged, 2 men who immediately headed toward the saloon and then her. Naomi Wilson stepped down carefully, her dark blue traveling dress dusty from the journey. She was smaller than he had imagined, maybe 5'3", with auburn hair pinned back beneath a modest bonnet. Her face was pale, her green eyes wide and watchful like a deer sensing wolves. She clutched a single worn carpetbag against her chest as though it contained everything she owned in the world. It probably did. Benjamin removed his hat and approached slowly. "Miss Wilson, I am Benjamin Fuller." She looked at him, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes, fear perhaps, or maybe relief. She nodded once but said nothing. He waited, but no words came. "I hope your journey was not too difficult. Concord is not much, but it is home. My ranch is about 5 miles north. I have a wagon ready whenever you are." Another nod. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Pete who Benjamin knew from town, leaned in close. "She has not said a word the whole way from San Francisco. Not one. I thought maybe she was just shy, but she will not even ask for water. We had to offer it to her." Benjamin felt his stomach tighten. The letters he had received, neat and carefully written, had given no indication of this. They had been brief but coherent, written in a delicate hand that suggested education. She had explained she was an orphan, raised by an aunt in Boston who had recently died, leaving her with no family and few prospects. The arrangement had seemed straightforward, 2 lonely people seeking companionship and partnership. He looked at her again. She was trembling slightly despite the heat. "Miss Wilson," he said gently, "is something wrong? Are you ill?" She shook her head quickly, then looked down at her feet. "Can you speak?" The question hung in the air. For a long moment she did not move. Then slowly she shook her head again, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Benjamin felt something twist in his chest. Whatever he had expected, it was not this. But as he looked at her standing there, alone and afraid in a strange town beside a strange man, he made a decision that would shape both their lives. "That is all right," he said quietly. "We will figure it out together. Come on, let me take your bag." She hesitated, then allowed him to take the carpetbag. It was lighter than he expected. He gestured toward his wagon, and she followed at a small distance, her eyes taking in everything: the wooden buildings, the people stopping to stare, the dust and heat and wildness of California. The wagon ride to the ranch was silent except for the creak of wheels and the clip of hooves. Benjamin tried to fill the quiet with words, pointing out landmarks, talking about the weather, explaining about the ranch. "I have about 200 head of cattle right now. It is not the biggest spread, but it is honest work. The house is simple, but it is sturdy. Built it myself with my father before he passed. There is a well with good water, and the land is beautiful in the spring when the wildflowers bloom." Naomi sat rigid beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She never looked at him directly, but he could see her taking in the rolling hills, the oak trees scattered across the golden grassland, the distant purple mountains. When they arrived at the ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was a modest wooden structure with a covered porch, a barn nearby, and corrals stretching out beyond. A few chickens scratched in the yard, and his dog, a border collie named Jack, came bounding up to greet them. Naomi actually smiled when she saw the dog, just a small curve of her lips, but it was the first sign of anything other than fear Benjamin had seen from her. "That is Jack." "He is friendly, maybe too friendly." "Jack, sit." The dog obeyed, though his tail wagged furiously. Naomi slowly reached out and let him sniff her hand, then gently patted his head. "He likes you," Benjamin said. "That is a good sign. Jack is particular about people." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag to the house. Inside, he had cleaned as best he could, though he knew it probably did not meet a woman's standards. The main room had a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a few shelves with books and supplies. 2 doors led to small bedrooms. "I prepared the room on the left for you," Benjamin said, suddenly feeling awkward. "I will take the one on the right. I want you to know, Miss Wilson, I am not expecting anything from you beyond companionship and perhaps help with the household in time. We can take this slow. The marriage does not have to happen right away if you are not ready." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something like gratitude in her eyes. She touched her throat, then shook her head sadly. "You cannot speak at all," she shook her head. "Was it an illness? An injury?" Her face went pale and she looked away quickly. Her whole body seemed to curl in on itself. Benjamin held up his hands. "I am sorry. You do not have to explain. Not now, maybe not ever if you do not want to, but I want you to know you are safe here. Whatever happened to you, it is in the past. This is a new start." She met his eyes again, searching for something, honesty perhaps, or sincerity. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly and picked up her bag, moving toward the room he had indicated. That first evening was strange and careful. Benjamin cooked supper, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. He was not much of a cook, but he managed. Naomi sat at the table, her hands in her lap, watching him move around the kitchen. When he set a plate before her, she looked surprised, as though she had not expected to be served. "I hope it is edible," he said with a slight smile. "I have been cooking for myself for 2 years now, and I am afraid my skills have not improved much." She picked up her fork and took a small bite, then another. She nodded to indicate it was fine. They ate in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Benjamin found himself talking, filling the quiet with stories about the ranch, about Jack, about the town and the people in it. "There is a good community here, mostly families who came during the gold rush and stayed when the easy gold ran out. They are honest folks. The nearest neighbor is the Henderson family, about 3 miles east. Sarah Henderson is a kind woman. I think you would like her. They have 5 children, all running wild like tumbleweeds." Naomi listened, and he noticed she seemed to relax slightly as he talked. Her shoulders dropped from around her ears, and some of the tension left her face. After supper, she insisted on washing the dishes. He could tell by the way she stood and gestured toward the basin. He let her, understanding that she needed to contribute to feel useful. While she worked, he sat at the table and watched her, this mysterious woman who had traveled across the country to marry a stranger and who carried some burden so heavy it had stolen her voice. When the dishes were done, she turned to him and placed her hand over her heart, then gestured to him and the room. It took him a moment to understand. "You are thanking me," she nodded. "You are welcome," he said softly. "I am glad you are here, Miss Wilson. I truly am." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes, and Benjamin felt his heart do something unexpected. The days fell into a pattern. Benjamin rose early to tend the cattle and horses, and when he returned for breakfast, he would find Naomi already up, having prepared coffee and whatever simple meal she could manage with the supplies on hand. She could not ask him what he wanted or where things were kept, so she learned by exploring, by watching, by trial and error. He started leaving notes for her, simple things written on scraps of paper. Gone to check the north pasture back by noon, or eggs in the barn, flour in the blue tin. She began leaving notes too. Her handwriting was lovely, educated, and precise. Thank you for the firewood. The bread needs more yeast. We'll make a list for town. It became their way of communicating, along with gestures and expressions. Benjamin found himself talking to her constantly, narrating his day, his thoughts, his memories. At first, it felt strange, having a one-sided conversation, but Naomi was an attentive listener. She watched him when he spoke, her eyes tracking his face, and he could see her processing, understanding, reacting even without words. Sometimes she would smile at his jokes, or her brow would furrow with concern when he talked about a sick calf or a broken fence. He learned to read her expressions, the subtle shifts in her face that conveyed meaning. A tilt of her head meant she was curious. A slight narrowing of her eyes meant she was skeptical. A soft exhalation through her nose meant she was amused. They developed a language of their own, built from necessity and growing familiarity. 3 weeks after her arrival, Benjamin took her into town. Concord was busier than when she had arrived, with farmers and ranchers coming in for supplies before the fall. Naomi stayed close to his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they navigated the crowded Main Street. At the general store, the proprietor, a rotund man named Mr. Simmons, greeted them warmly. "Fuller, and this must be your new bride. Heard she arrived a few weeks back." "This is Miss Naomi Wilson," Benjamin said. "We are not married yet, just getting to know each other." "Well, welcome to Concord, Miss Wilson," Mr. Simmons said jovially. "What can I get for you folks today?" Naomi pulled out a carefully written list and handed it to Benjamin, who read it aloud. "Flour, yeast, sugar, salt, coffee, dried apples, thread, needles, and fabric if you have something suitable." Mr. Simmons nodded and started gathering items. "Got some nice calico that came in last week. Let me show the lady." He brought out bolts of fabric in various colors and patterns. Naomi's eyes lit up, and she carefully examined each one, running her fingers over the material. She finally selected a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes and a practical brown for everyday wear. While Mr. Simmons measured and cut the fabric, a woman approached them. She was in her mid-30s, with laugh lines around her eyes and flour dusting her apron. "Benjamin Fuller, you have been hiding this young lady away. I am Sarah Henderson. My husband has the farm east of your ranch." Benjamin smiled. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Naomi Wilson. I mentioned you to her." Sarah extended her hand and Naomi shook it, smiling shyly. "You must come to dinner soon," Sarah said warmly. "I would love to have another woman to talk to. Lord knows I get tired of discussing cattle and crops all day." Naomi looked at Benjamin uncertainly. He understood her concern. "Naomi does not speak," he said simply, "but she would probably enjoy the company all the same." Sarah did not miss a beat. "Well, I talk enough for 3 people anyway. My husband says I could talk the ears off a donkey. How about next Sunday after church? You both come, and I will make a proper meal." Naomi nodded, and Benjamin accepted. As they left the store with their supplies, he noticed Naomi seemed lighter somehow, as though Sarah's easy acceptance had lifted something from her shoulders. On the ride back to the ranch, with the supplies packed in the wagon bed, Benjamin glanced at her. Sarah is a good woman. There are good people here, Naomi. They will accept you as you are. She looked at him and placed her hand briefly over his where it rested on the reins. The gesture was quick, almost shy, but it made his pulse quicken. That evening, Naomi began cutting and sewing the fabric into a new dress. She worked by lamplight, her stitches small and precise, transforming the material with skilled hands. Benjamin sat nearby, mending tack and watching her work. "You are good at that," he observed. "Where did you learn to sew so well?" She paused, then reached for the slate board he had brought her, a small chalkboard they now used for longer communications. She wrote, "My aunt was a seamstress in Boston. She taught me." "She raised you," Naomi nodded, then hesitated before writing more. "She died 6 months ago." "I am sorry," Benjamin said quietly. "Losing family is hard. I lost my mother 2 years back, my father before that. Sometimes the loneliness feels like it might swallow you whole." She met his eyes, and in that moment they understood each other perfectly. Two orphans, two lonely souls who had found their way to each other through chance and circumstance. She wrote again. "Why did you send for a mail-order bride?" Benjamin considered his answer. "I could tell you it was for practical reasons, needing help with the house, wanting a family. But the truth is, I was lonely. This ranch, it is beautiful, but at night when the work is done and there is no one to talk to, no one to share the sunsets with, it feels empty. I wanted someone to build a life with, someone to make this house a home." Naomi's eyes glistened and she wrote, "I understand. Will you tell me someday what happened to you, why you cannot speak?" Her hand trembled as she wrote, "Someday maybe, not yet." "That is fair," he said. "I can wait." The next Sunday they dressed in their best clothes and rode to the small white church on the edge of Concord. The building was simple, with wooden pews and a cross above the altar. Reverend Thomas, a kind man in his 50s, greeted them at the door. "Benjamin, good to see you. And this must be Miss Wilson." Benjamin made the introductions, explaining about Naomi's silence. The Reverend took it in stride. "All are welcome in God's house, speaking or silent. The Lord hears the prayers of the heart just as clearly as those spoken aloud." The service was simple and familiar. Naomi sat beside Benjamin, a hymnal open in her lap though she could not sing. But she mouthed the words, and Benjamin noticed tears on her cheeks during one particular hymn, "Amazing Grace." He wanted to take her hand to offer comfort, but they were in public, and propriety held him back. After the service, Sarah Henderson swept down on them with her husband Thomas and their 5 children in tow. "There you are. Come on, dinner is waiting at the house. We live just a short ride from here." The Henderson home was warm and chaotic, filled with the noise and energy of children ranging from 3 to 14. The oldest, a daughter named Martha, helped her mother in the kitchen. The youngest, a boy named Peter, clung to his father's leg. The middle 3, 2 boys and a girl, ran around the yard with a dog that looked like Jack's cousin. Sarah set out a feast: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, green beans from her garden, and apple pie for dessert. The table was crowded and loud, with everyone talking over each other, telling stories and laughing. Naomi sat between Benjamin and Martha, looking a bit overwhelmed but also captivated. Sarah noticed. "It is a madhouse, I know. You get used to it or you go deaf, one or the other." Thomas Henderson, a solid man with kind eyes, asked Benjamin about the ranch. "How are your cattle doing? I heard there was some sickness going around. A few cases of pink eye, but we caught it early, separated the sick ones, treated them. They should be fine." The conversation flowed easily, and Benjamin noticed that no one made Naomi feel awkward about her silence. When Sarah asked her questions, she framed them so Naomi could nod or shake her head. Martha, the 14-year-old, was particularly kind, showing Naomi her embroidery work and asking her opinion with gestures. After dinner, the women sat on the porch while the men looked at a horse Thomas was thinking of buying. Sarah poured lemonade and settled into her rocking chair with a contented sigh. "Finally, a moment's peace," she said. "Miss Wilson, Naomi, may I call you Naomi?" Naomi nodded. "I am so glad you came to Concord. Benjamin is a good man, one of the best. He has been alone too long. I told Thomas just last month that someone needed to help that boy find a wife before he turned into a complete hermit." Martha giggled. "Mama, you say that about every bachelor in town." "Because it is true. Men are helpless on their own. They need women to civilize them, to remind them there is more to life than cattle and dirt." Naomi smiled, relaxing into the warmth of their company. Sarah leaned forward. "I do not mean to pry, but Benjamin mentioned you do not speak. If you ever want to communicate and he is not around to help, Martha here is learning to read and write real good. She could help you." Martha nodded eagerly. "I could. And I know some hand signs too. There was a deaf boy in our church back in Missouri before we moved here. His sister taught me some signs." Naomi's eyes widened with interest. She mimed writing, and Martha ran to get paper and a pencil. "You know many signs," Naomi wrote. "Some," Martha said. "Mostly simple things, but I could teach you what I know, and maybe you could teach me new ones." Over the next hour, Martha showed Naomi the signs she knew. Basic things like hello, thank you, yes, no, and a few others. Naomi picked them up quickly and showed Martha a few she knew from her time in Boston, where she had apparently met others who used hand signs to communicate. When Benjamin came back with Thomas, he found the women engaged in animated silent conversation, Naomi's face more alive than he had ever seen it. "Looks like they are getting along," Thomas observed with a smile. "Looks like it," Benjamin agreed, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. On the ride home, as the sun set behind them and the evening air cooled, Naomi reached over and took Benjamin's hand. He looked at her in surprise, but she was gazing ahead, a small smile on her lips. He squeezed her hand gently and did not let go until they reached the ranch. That night marked a shift between them. The careful distance they had maintained began to close. They were not just two strangers sharing a house anymore. Something deeper was growing, tentative and fragile but real. Benjamin found himself looking forward to the end of each day when they would sit together, him in his chair by the fire, her on the sofa with her sewing or a book. He would talk about his day, and she would listen, occasionally writing responses or asking questions on her slate. They discussed everything: his childhood, his parents, his dreams for the ranch, books they had read, places they wanted to see. Naomi wrote about Boston, about her aunt who had been strict but loving, about the busy streets and the harbor. She wrote about learning to sew, about the books she had read in her aunt's small library, about missing the ocean even though she had never been on a ship. What she did not write about was what had happened to her voice. Benjamin did not push. He could see pain in her eyes when the subject came near, and he respected her silence on the matter. A month passed, then two. Fall arrived, painting the hills in gold and brown. Benjamin taught Naomi to ride, starting with his most gentle mare, a sweet-tempered horse named Daisy. At first, Naomi was terrified, her hands shaking as she gripped the saddle horn. But Benjamin walked beside her, his hand on the horse's bridle, talking in that steady, calm way he had. "You are doing fine, just fine. Daisy would never hurt you. She is the gentlest creature on this ranch besides maybe Jack. Just relax and move with her. That is it, just like that. You are a natural." By the end of the week, Naomi was riding beside him as they checked the cattle in the far pastures. The fear had left her eyes, replaced by exhilaration. up on horseback, with the wind in her hair and the vast California landscape spread before her. She looked free. One evening in late October, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color, deep oranges and reds fading to purple. Naomi had brought out coffee and they sipped in comfortable silence. Benjamin finally said what had been on his mind for weeks. "Naomi, I know we agreed to take this slow, to not rush into anything, but I need to tell you that my feelings have changed. Or maybe they have not changed, maybe they have just grown clearer. I care about you, more than I thought possible. You have made this house a home, and not just because you cook and clean. You have made my life better just by being in it. I find myself talking to you about things I have never told anyone. I look forward to seeing you every morning, and I think, if you are willing, we should make this official. I would like to marry you, Naomi, not because of the arrangement, but because I am falling in love with you." Naomi set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. In the fading light, he could see tears on her cheeks. She stood and went into the house, and for a moment, Benjamin feared he had pushed too hard, said too much. But she returned with her slate and had written a longer message than usual. "I care for you too, Benjamin, more than I can express. You have been kind and patient and good. You make me feel safe for the first time in a very long time. But there are things you do not know about me, things that happened before I came here. I am afraid if I tell you, you will not want me anymore." Benjamin read it twice, then met her eyes. "Naomi, I do not care what happened before. We all have pasts. We all have things we regret or things that were done to us. What matters is who you are now, and the woman you are now is someone I love. Nothing you tell me will change that." She shook her head, wiping at her tears. She wrote, "You do not know that? Then tell me. Whatever it is, we will face it together." For a long moment she hesitated. Then slowly she began to write. It took several boards full, erasing and writing again, and with each word Benjamin's heart grew heavier. She wrote about her aunt's death, about being left alone in Boston with no money and no prospects. She wrote about a man, a wealthy merchant named Richard Caldwell, who had offered her employment as a seamstress in his household. She had accepted gratefully, needing the work desperately. But Caldwell had not wanted a seamstress. He had wanted something else entirely. When she refused his advances, he became violent. He attacked her in his home, and when she screamed, he had his hands around her throat, choking her, threatening to kill her if she ever told anyone what he had done. She survived, but her voice did not. Whether from the physical trauma to her throat or the psychological horror of the attack, she did not know. But after that night, she could not make a sound. No scream, no whisper, nothing. She managed to escape, finding shelter in a church where a kind priest helped her. He suggested the matrimonial agency, a way to start over somewhere far from Boston, far from Caldwell. She agreed, desperate to leave, to disappear. "I am damaged," she wrote. "I am broken. You deserve someone whole." Benjamin read every word, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching. When he finished, he set the slate down carefully and took both of her hands in his. "Listen to me, Naomi. You are not damaged. You are not broken. You are a survivor. What that man did to you was evil, but it does not define you. You are so much more than what happened to you. You are smart and kind and strong enough to cross a continent alone to start over, strong enough to trust again even after someone hurt you so badly." She was crying openly now, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. "I am angry," Benjamin continued, his voice tight. "I am angry that someone hurt you. I am angry that you had to go through that alone. But I am not angry at you, and I do not want you any less. If anything, I love you more for trusting me enough to tell me." He pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against his chest, crying silently while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances. "You are safe now. I will never let anyone hurt you again. You are home, Naomi, you are home." They stood there on the porch as the last light faded from the sky, holding each other, two wounded souls finding healing in each other's arms. The next morning, Naomi came to breakfast with a determined look on her face. She had her slate in hand and had written a message before Benjamin even sat down. "I want to marry you, not because I need protection or a home, but because I love you. You have given me my life back. I want to share it with you." Benjamin read it and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you sure? We can wait as long as you need." She shook her head firmly and pointed to the words again. "I love you." He stood and cupped her face in his hands, looking into her green eyes. "I love you too, Naomi Wilson, more than words can say." Then he kissed her, gently, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not. Instead, she leaned into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, kissing him back with all the words she could not speak. They were married the following Sunday in the little white church in Concord. Sarah Henderson stood as Naomi's witness and Thomas Henderson stood for Benjamin. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, adapting it slightly so that when it came time for Naomi's vows, she held up a card on which she had written, "I do." The Reverend smiled. "I think the good Lord hears those words just as clearly as if they were shouted from the rooftops. Benjamin Fuller, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Benjamin said, his voice strong and sure. "I absolutely do." They held a small celebration at the Henderson house afterward. Sarah had made a cake, and several families from town came to congratulate them. Naomi wore the green dress she had made, and someone had woven wildflowers into her hair. She looked beautiful, her face glowing with happiness. As they danced, or rather swayed together while a neighbor played fiddle, Benjamin whispered in her ear, "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for trusting me with your heart." She pulled back enough to look at him and mouthed, "Thank you for loving me." He could not hear the words, but he understood them perfectly. Their wedding night was tender and careful, two people learning each other, showing love without words. Benjamin was patient, making sure she felt safe, that she knew she could stop anytime. But Naomi did not want to stop. She wanted to reclaim what had been stolen from her, to replace the violence and fear with something beautiful. And it was beautiful, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Afterward, lying in bed with her head on his chest, Benjamin played with her hair and talked. He told her about the future he envisioned, about expanding the ranch, about children if she wanted them, about growing old together on this land they both loved. Naomi traced patterns on his chest with her finger, spelling out words. He had to concentrate to follow, but he made out, "I want all of that with you." Life settled into a new rhythm. They were husband and wife now, partners in every sense. Naomi took over more of the ranch management, proving herself to have a good head for numbers and organization. She reorganized the books, started a garden in the spring, and even helped with the cattle when needed, though the heavy work was still Benjamin's domain. The neighbors accepted her fully. Sarah Henderson visited often, and Martha became like a younger sister to Naomi, coming over to practice their hand signs and learn sewing techniques. The women of Concord appreciated having another skilled seamstress in town, and Naomi began taking in work, altering dresses, making clothes for children, even creating a wedding dress for a young bride. Benjamin marveled at how she had transformed his life. The house was fuller, warmer. There were curtains on the windows now, rugs on the floors, and the smell of bread baking. But more than that, there was love. It filled every corner, evident in the way Naomi smiled when he came in from the fields, in the notes she left for him to find, in the way she would come up behind him and wrap her arms around his waist while he washed up for supper. He continued to talk to her, probably more than he had ever talked to anyone. He narrated his day, his thoughts, his feelings. Some men might have found it strange, having a wife who could not respond in kind, but Benjamin found it liberating. Naomi listened without judgment, without interrupting, and her responses, written or signed or simply expressed through her eyes, were thoughtful and genuine. Winter came, and with it, hard rains that turned the hills green. They spent long evenings by the fire, Naomi sewing or reading while Benjamin worked on tack or simply watched her, still amazed that she was his wife. One evening in January, nearly 6 months after their wedding, Naomi set down her sewing and picked up her slate. She seemed nervous, writing and erasing several times before finally showing him. "I am with child." Benjamin stared at the words, then at her. "Are you certain?" She nodded, a smile breaking across her face even as her eyes filled with tears. He let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" She laughed silently, her whole body shaking with it, and when he set her down, she was crying and smiling at the same time. "I am going to be a father," he said, wonder in his voice. Then his expression turned serious. "Are you all right? Is everything fine? Should we see the doctor?" She nodded vigorously and wrote, "I am fine, healthy, just tired and a little sick in the mornings. You should rest more. Let me do more around the house." She gave him a look that clearly said he was being ridiculous, but she wrote, "I will be careful, I promise." Over the next months, Benjamin watched in awe as Naomi's body changed, as their child grew inside her. He became even more protective, insisting she not overwork herself, bringing her tea and crackers for the morning sickness, reading to her in the evenings with his hand on her growing belly. Sarah Henderson was invaluable, having been through it 5 times herself. She visited regularly, bringing advice and supplies, preparing Naomi for what to expect. "The first one is always the scariest," Sarah said. "But women have been doing this since Eve. You will be fine. And you have got Benjamin, who is already hovering like a mother hen." Naomi smiled and wrote, "He means well." Of course he does. That is what makes it both endearing and annoying. In late summer, as the heat settled over California and the cattle sought shade beneath the oak trees, Naomi went into labor. It was a Sunday afternoon, and they had just returned from church when her water broke. Benjamin immediately went into a panic. "What do I do? Should I ride for the doctor? Should I get Sarah?" Naomi calmly wrote, "Get Sarah. We have time." He rode like the wind to the Henderson farm, returning with Sarah and Martha within the hour. Sarah took charge immediately, sending Benjamin to boil water and gather clean linens, then banishing him from the bedroom. This is women's work. You go pace on the porch like every other expectant father in the history of the world. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Benjamin did indeed pace the porch, unable to sit still, jumping at every sound from inside. Thomas Henderson arrived at some point and sat with him, offering silent support. "It is always hard waiting," Thomas said. "But Sarah knows what she is doing. Naomi is strong. They will both be fine." Just after dawn, when the sky was turning pink, Benjamin heard a sound that made his heart stop. A baby's cry, thin and strong, piercing the morning air. Then Sarah appeared at the door, grinning. "Congratulations, Benjamin, you have a son." He nearly fell over in his rush to get inside. In the bedroom, Naomi lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. He approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at his son. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving. "He is perfect," Benjamin whispered. "You are amazing. You did it." Naomi smiled and gestured for him to sit beside her. Carefully, she placed the baby in his arms. Benjamin looked down at his son, overcome with emotion. "Hello, little one. I am your papa, and this is your mama, the bravest, strongest woman in the world." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, and tiny eyes tried to focus. "What should we name him?" Benjamin asked. Naomi had clearly thought about this. She pointed to the slate Martha had ready, where a name was already written. "James Thomas Fuller, after your father and Thomas Henderson." Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. "James, that is perfect. James Thomas Fuller, welcome to the world." The baby yawned, and both parents laughed, the sound filling the room with joy. Sarah and Martha helped Naomi rest and cleaned up. Benjamin held his son, unwilling to put him down, talking to him about the ranch, about the cattle, about all the things they would do together. "I am going to teach you to ride and to rope cattle and to take care of this land. But more importantly, I am going to teach you to be kind and honest and to respect women, especially your mother. She is the strongest person I know." Over the next weeks, they adjusted to life with a baby. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them up at night with his demands to be fed. Naomi could not sing him lullabies, but she hummed silently, and somehow the baby seemed to sense her presence, calming when she held him. Benjamin discovered he loved being a father. He would talk to James constantly, narrating everything he did. "Now we are going to change your diaper, which is definitely the worst part of this job. Your mama does this more than me, so I should probably not complain. There we go, all clean, see? Not so bad." Naomi would watch them together, her heart full. Benjamin was everything she had never dared to hope for: a good man, a loving husband, a devoted father. Sarah visited often, bringing meals and helping with the baby. "He is beautiful, Naomi. You and Benjamin did good work." One afternoon, when James was about 3 months old and napping peacefully, Sarah brought up something that had been on her mind. "Naomi, have you thought about trying to get your voice back? I mean, if it is possible." Martha mentioned there are doctors back east who specialize in ailments of the throat. Naomi reached for her slate. "I have thought about it, but I am afraid. Afraid it will not work, afraid it will hurt, afraid of remembering." Sarah nodded. "That makes sense. But you know, sometimes facing our fears is the only way through them, and you would not be alone. Benjamin would be with you." That evening, Naomi brought it up with Benjamin. She wrote, "What if there was a way to get my voice back? Would you want me to try?" Benjamin set down the tack he was mending. "That depends. Do you want to try?" "I do not know. I am scared." "Of what?" "Of failing, of the memories, of changing what we have." Benjamin moved to sit beside her. "Naomi, I fell in love with you exactly as you are. If you never speak another word, I will love you just the same. But if you want to try, if you want to see if it is possible, I will support you completely. This decision is yours, not mine." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." But the seed had been planted. Over the next months, as James grew and began to smile and laugh, Naomi found herself wondering more and more. What would it be like to speak again? To tell Benjamin she loved him out loud, to sing to her son, to laugh with Sarah without restraint. The fear was still there, heavy and real. But so was the longing. In the spring, when James was nearly a year old, a traveling doctor came through Concord. He was from San Francisco, making rounds through the smaller towns. Sarah mentioned that he had studied in Europe and specialized in ailments others could not treat. "It might be worth talking to him," she suggested gently, "just to see if he thinks anything can be done." Naomi agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. Doctor. Harrison was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands. Benjamin accompanied Naomi to the appointment at the small clinic in town. She had written out her history, the attack, the choking, the loss of voice. Dr. Harrison read it carefully, then asked permission to examine her throat. He was professional and respectful, explaining everything he was doing. After a thorough examination, he sat back. "There is some scarring on your vocal cords, likely from the trauma, but I have seen worse cases where the voice was recovered. The bigger question is whether the mutism is physical or psychological. Often, it is a combination of both. The body remembers the trauma even after it heals." "Can you help her?" Benjamin asked, his hand tight around Naomi's. "I can try." There are exercises, techniques to strengthen the vocal cords and retrain them. But she has to want it. It will be difficult, possibly painful, and there is no guarantee of success. He looked at Naomi. "The choice is yours, Mrs. Fuller. If you want to try, I can work with you. But you have to be committed." Naomi looked at Benjamin, then down at James in her arms. She picked up her slate with one hand and wrote, "I want to try." Dr. Harrison smiled. "Good, we will start today." The process was indeed difficult. Dr. Harrison taught her breathing exercises, had her practice making sounds, starting with the simplest, a hum, a whisper. At first, nothing came. It was frustrating and frightening. Naomi would try until tears ran down her face, until her throat hurt, and still nothing. But Dr. Harrison was patient. "Trauma buried your voice, but it is still there. We just have to coax it back. Do not force it. Let it come naturally." Benjamin encouraged her constantly. "You are doing great. I am so proud of you for trying." After 2 weeks, there was a breakthrough. Naomi was practicing her breathing exercises while Benjamin worked nearby and James played on a blanket. She exhaled slowly, trying to add sound, and suddenly a tiny noise emerged. Not a word, barely a whisper, but sound. Her eyes went wide. She tried again. Another whisper of breath, slightly louder. Benjamin looked up. "Was that you?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "You did it. I heard you. It was only the beginning." Over the next months, Naomi worked tirelessly. The whispers became stronger, turned into croaks, then into something resembling words. Each small victory was celebrated. The first time she whispered, "Benjamin," he cried. The first time she whispered, "I love you," they both did. It was not a smooth process. There were setbacks and frustrations. Some days she could manage a few words. Other days the fear would rise up and choke her as surely as Caldwell's hands had, and no sound would come. But slowly, steadily, her voice returned. It was different than before, softer, more hesitant, but it was hers. The first time she spoke to James, calling him by name in a quiet voice, the baby was startled. He was 15 months old by then, and he had never heard his mother's voice. He stared at her, then broke into a huge smile and reached for her, babbling, "Mama, Mama." Naomi laughed, actually laughed aloud, and the sound was like music. By the time James turned 2, Naomi was speaking regularly, though still quietly and carefully. Her voice tired easily, and she still used her slate when she was exhausted. But she could communicate in a new way, adding dimension to her relationship with Benjamin and her son. Benjamin loved hearing her voice, but he never took it for granted. He remembered the months of silence, the communication they had built through other means, and he treasured all of it. "I fell in love with you without ever hearing your voice," he told her one night as they lay in bed. "And I would love you just the same if you never spoke another word. Your voice is a gift, but it is not what makes you who you are." "I know," she whispered, "but I am glad to have it back. There is so much I want to say to you." "Then say it. I am listening." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Benjamin Fuller. You saved me. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. You spoke enough love for both of us when I could not speak at all. You never made me feel less than whole. You are the best man I have ever known, and I thank God every day that I answered that advertisement, that the stage coach brought me to you." Benjamin kissed her softly. "I am the one who should be thanking God. You are my miracle, Naomi. You and James both." Life continued to unfold in beautiful ways. The ranch prospered, and they expanded their herd. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, chattering constantly. Benjamin joked that James had inherited his mother's lost words, talking enough for 3 people. When James was 4, Naomi became pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, knowing what to expect. Sarah was thrilled. "The more the merrier, I always say." Their daughter was born on a cool November evening in 1874, 5 years after Naomi had first arrived in Concord. The birth was easier than James's, and the baby was smaller, with Naomi's auburn hair and Benjamin's blue eyes. They named her Rose after the wildflowers that bloomed on the hills every spring. James was enchanted with his baby sister. "She is so small, Mama. Will she grow bigger?" "Yes, darling," Naomi said, her voice warm with affection. "Just like you did. Can I hold her?" Benjamin helped James sit carefully, then placed Rose in his arms, supporting them both. "You have to be very gentle. She is fragile." "I will protect her," James said solemnly. "Nobody will ever hurt her." Naomi and Benjamin exchanged a look over their children's heads, both thinking of the past, of the hurts that had been healed, of the love that had overcome trauma and fear. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James started school in Concord, riding into town with Benjamin each morning. Rose grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then into a bright little girl who loved horses and flowers equally. Naomi took in more sewing work, building a reputation throughout the region for her skill. Benjamin's herd grew to over 500 head, making theirs one of the more prosperous ranches in the area. They added onto the house, building 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The Henderson children grew up, and Martha eventually married a young rancher from the next town over. Sarah became a grandmother, and her joy was infectious. Through it all, Naomi's voice grew stronger. She would never be loud. Her vocal cords had been too damaged for that, but she could speak clearly, could sing soft lullabies to her children, could laugh with Sarah over coffee, could tell Benjamin she loved him out loud every single day. But they never lost the other ways of communicating either. Benjamin still talked to her constantly, narrating his thoughts and days. She still left him notes sometimes, little messages tucked into his saddlebag or on his pillow. They still had their hand signs that Martha had taught them, used now mostly with the children as a game but remembered from the days when they were necessity. On their 10th anniversary, Benjamin took Naomi to San Francisco for a week, leaving the children with Sarah and Thomas. It was Naomi's first time back to the city since she had left on that stage coach a decade before. She was nervous as they walked the streets, afraid of memories, afraid of seeing someone from her past. But Benjamin held her hand tightly. "You are not that frightened girl anymore," he reminded her. "You are Naomi Fuller, rancher's wife, mother, businesswoman. You are strong and capable, and no one can hurt you now." She squeezed his hand. "You are right. And besides, I have you, always." They enjoyed the city, seeing the sights, eating in restaurants, even attending the theater. On the last night, they stood on the wharf, watching the ships come and go in the harbor. "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Benjamin asked. Naomi turned to him, taking both his hands. "Never, not for one moment. Everything I went through, all the pain and fear, it led me to you. And I would go through it all again if I knew you were waiting at the end." "You will never have to go through anything alone again," he promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." They returned to the ranch to find James and Rose wild with excitement, having spent the week being spoiled by Sarah. The house was a mess, and there were chickens somehow in the barn where they did not belong, but the children were happy and healthy, and that was all that mattered. Life settled back into its comfortable patterns. James, now 12, was becoming a skilled horseman and ranch hand. Rose, at 8, was learning to sew from her mother and already showing talent. Benjamin had trained several young men from town to help with the cattle, and the ranch ran smoothly. One evening in late spring, with the wildflowers blooming across the hills and the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors, the family sat on the porch. James was whittling a piece of wood, attempting to make a horse. Rose was drawing in a sketchbook Sarah had given her. Naomi was mending, and Benjamin was simply watching them all, his heart full. "Papa," Rose said suddenly, "how did you and Mama meet?" Benjamin glanced at Naomi, who smiled and nodded. They had always been honest with the children, age-appropriately so. "Well," Benjamin began, "your mama came here as a mail-order bride. Do you know what that is?" "Not really," James admitted, looking up from his carving. Back then, there were not many women out west, and there were not many opportunities for women back east. So there were agencies that would help men and women find each other through letters. I wrote to the agency saying I was looking for a wife, and your mama responded. "That is strange," Rose said. "You married someone you had never met." It was not common, but it was not unheard of either. "And it worked out pretty well, I would say." He reached over and took Naomi's hand. "But Mama could not talk when she first came here, right?" James asked. He knew some of the story, though not all the details. "That is right," Naomi said softly. "Something happened to me before I came here that took my voice away. Your papa helped me find it again." "How?" Rose asked, fascinated. Benjamin answered. "I loved her. I talked to her and listened to her, even when she could not talk back. We found ways to communicate. And eventually, with help from a doctor and a lot of hard work, your mama's voice came back." "That is romantic," Rose sighed. James rolled his eyes. "It is weird, but in a good way, I guess." Naomi laughed. "Love is often weird, James, but it is also the most important thing in the world. Your father taught me that." "I did not teach you anything," Benjamin protested. "You knew how to love, you just needed to feel safe enough to do it." "See," Rose said to her brother, "romantic." As the children went back to their activities, Benjamin and Naomi sat hand in hand, watching the sun set over the land they had built a life on. "We did good, did we not?" Benjamin said quietly. "We did very good," Naomi agreed. "I never imagined I could be this happy. After everything that happened, I thought I was broken forever, but you showed me I was not broken, just hurt, and hurt things can heal." "We healed each other," Benjamin said. "I was lonely and lost, and you gave me purpose and joy. We were both incomplete, and we made each other whole." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Benjamin Fuller. I will never stop saying it, not after all those years of silence. And I will never stop listening," he promised. "Though to be fair, I would have kept loving you even if you had never spoken another word. I know. That is why I love you." The years continued their steady march. James grew into a fine young man, taking over more of the ranch work. At 18, he started courting a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Lucy with dark hair and a quick laugh. Rose became a talented artist, selling her sketches and paintings in town, though she showed no interest in leaving the ranch. She loved the land as much as her father did. Benjamin and Naomi grew older together, their hair turning gray, lines deepening around their eyes from years of smiling. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and trials overcome. When James married Lucy, the wedding was held at the ranch, with half of Concord in attendance. Sarah Henderson, now white-haired but still energetic, cried through the whole ceremony. "I remember when you arrived, Naomi, so scared and silent. Look at you now, mother of the groom, pillar of the community. I am so proud of you." Naomi embraced her friend. "I could not have done it without you, Sarah. You were the first person besides Benjamin to make me feel welcome, to treat me like I was normal. You are normal, dear. Just special, too." A year later, James and Lucy gave Naomi and Benjamin their first grandchild, a boy they named Benjamin after his grandfather. Holding his grandson, Benjamin was overcome with emotion. "Look at him, Naomi, our grandson. Who would have thought we would be so blessed?" "I knew from the moment I met you that good things were ahead," Naomi said. "You gave me hope when I had none." Rose eventually married too, a young rancher named Daniel who had land adjoining theirs. They built a house on the property line, close enough to visit easily but far enough for privacy. Rose and Daniel had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and the ranch was often filled with the sound of grandchildren playing. Through it all, Benjamin and Naomi remained the center of their growing family. They were the ones everyone came to for advice, for comfort, for wisdom. They had lived through hardship and emerged stronger, and their example showed others what was possible. On a spring evening in 1895, Benjamin and Naomi sat on their porch, much as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 50s now, their children grown, their grandchildren thriving. The ranch was prosperous, their life full. "You ever think about that day you arrived?" Benjamin asked. "When you stepped off that stagecoach, so scared and alone?" Naomi nodded. "I think about it often. I was terrified. I had no idea what I was walking into, whether you would be kind or cruel, whether I had made the biggest mistake of my life. And now," she smiled, "now I know it was the best decision I ever made. You were worth every moment of fear, every mile traveled. You took a broken woman and loved her back to wholeness. You spoke enough love for both of us until I could find my own voice again." Benjamin pulled her close. "We saved each other, Naomi. That is what love does. It saves us from our loneliness, our pain, our past. It gives us hope for the future." As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they sat together in comfortable silence. Around them, the ranch bustled with life. James was in the barn with his sons, teaching them to care for the horses. Rose was in her house nearby, putting her children to bed. The cattle lowed in the distance, the chickens roosted for the night, and Jack's great-great-grandson, also named Jack, slept on the porch at their feet. It was a good life, built on love and trust and perseverance. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for on that hot August day in 1869, when a silent woman stepped off a stagecoach and into the arms of a lonely cowboy who would love her enough for both of them, until she could love herself again. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all. Not the ranch, not the children, not the prosperous years, but the simple, profound truth that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that patience and kindness could restore what violence had stolen, and that 2 broken people could build something beautiful together. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Naomi whispered, "Thank you, Benjamin, for everything." "No," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy, for making this house a home, for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." They sat there until the moon rose high, hand in hand, heart to heart. 2 souls who had found their way to each other across miles and through trauma, who had built a love strong enough to weather any storm. And as the night deepened around them, filled with the sounds of their family, their land, their life, They knew they had found what everyone searches for but few truly discover: a love that transcends words, a partnership that endures, and a happiness earned through trials overcome together. The story of Benjamin and Naomi Fuller became legend in Concord, passed down through generations as an example of true love. People spoke of the mail-order bride who arrived unable to speak, and the cowboy who loved her anyway, whose patience and devotion helped her find her voice again. They spoke of the family that grew from that humble beginning, of the children and grandchildren who carried forward the legacy of love and perseverance. Years later, when both Benjamin and Naomi had passed on peacefully in their old age, their grandchildren would gather and tell the story to their own children. They would talk about how Grandma Naomi had arrived in Concord silent and scared, how Grandpa Benjamin had spoken enough love for both of them, how their patience and faith in each other had built not just a family, but a foundation of love that would support generations to come. And in the telling and retelling, the story took on the quality of myth, though every word was true. Because sometimes, if we are very lucky, real life gives us love stories that are better than any fairy tale, more miraculous than any fiction. Sometimes two broken people find each other at exactly the right moment, and together they create something neither could have built alone. That was the story of Benjamin and Naomi Fuller, a cowboy and a mail-order bride who found love in the Wild West, who overcame trauma and loneliness to build a life filled with joy, family, and enduring love. Their story proved that sometimes silence speaks louder than words, that patience is more powerful than demands, and that true love sees past all barriers to the soul beneath. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the California hills, their descendants would remember and know that they were the legacy of that love, living proof that even from the darkest beginnings can come the brightest futures, and that love, patient and kind and true, can overcome anything. The ranch stood for generations, a testament to what Benjamin and Naomi had built. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure remained, the heart of the home where two people had learned to communicate without words, had built a language of love that needed no voice. The porch where they had sat countless evenings still stood, weathered by time but strong like the love it had witnessed. Their story was complete, their lives well lived, their love eternal. And in the end, that was everything they had hoped for when Naomi had stepped off that stagecoach in 1869 and Benjamin had taken a chance on a silent bride. They had found home in each other, and that home had grown to encompass children, grandchildren, land, and community. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a happy ending, the kind that felt earned rather than given, built through patience, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. It was the kind of love story that reminds us that healing is possible, that trauma does not have to define us, and that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the quiet, daily choices to see and value another person, to speak when they cannot, to believe in them when they cannot believe in themselves. Benjamin and Naomi Fuller had lived that love, and their descendants carried it forward, proof that love can indeed conquer all, that it can heal wounds, restore voices, and build futures from the broken pieces of the past. Their story was over, but its impact continued, rippling through time, touching lives, giving hope to anyone who heard it that they too could find such love, such healing, such home. And that was the true magic of their story. Not that it was extraordinary, but that it showed how ordinary people, faced with extraordinary circumstances, could create something beautiful through simple love, patience, and faith in each other. That was the legacy of the cowboy who spoke enough love for both of them, and the mail-order bride who arrived mute from trauma, but found her voice again in the safety of his love.